In the grand, sweeping theater of human history, amidst the epics of crowned kings and the lauded chronicles of celebrated generals, some stories lie shrouded, their true, breathtaking genius often overlooked, mistaken for simple folklore or pious myth. We are told tales of faith, of righteousness, of miracles that fall from the heavens. But what if I told you that one of the most electrifying, intricate, and successful accounts of political statecraft, high-stakes espionage, and psychological warfare was not a modern spy novel, but an ancient text hidden in plain sight? Today, we are not just recounting a story. We are embarking on a deep-dive investigation, a strategic analysis of one of the greatest political minds the world has ever known. A leader who emerged from the shadows of grief to decapitate a global superpower, not with an army, but with a profoundly brilliant and daring idea. This is the story of Judith, and I must implore you to set aside any sanitized, simplified version you might have encountered. This is not a quaint tale of a damsel in distress who prayed and, by some stroke of luck, was saved. This is the deconstruction of a political masterclass, a high-stakes chess game played for the ultimate prize, the survival of a nation and its very soul. We will meticulously expose how Judith diagnosed and dismantled an empire by first understanding its core political doctrine and then masterfully turning the enemy's most potent weapon, his unshakable, messianic arrogance, into the instrument of his own destruction. So, stay with me, because you are about to witness, in granular detail, how the very course of history was irrevocably altered by one woman who understood a fundamental truth of power: that faith, without brilliant, courageous, and audacious action, is but a quiet prayer in the face of a hurricane. Judith chose to become the hurricane. Our narrative ignites not in the humble pastoral hills of Judea, but within the roaring psychological furnace of supreme imperial ambition. The court of Nebuchadnezzar, the fearsome and absolute ruler of the Assyrians. To truly grasp the magnitude of the events that follow, we must first dissect the political engine driving this man and his empire. This was an era where empires were forged in the fires of brute force, but Nebuchadnezzar's vision transcended mere physical conquest. His ambition was far grander, far more dangerously absolute. Following a triumphant but costly war against the powerful Massacre War, his Western vassal states had contemptuously refused to support this victory, did not bring him satisfaction. Instead, it metastasized into a monstrous, vengeful pride. He swore a solemn oath, an oath not merely as a king but as a budding divinity in his own mind, an oath sworn upon his very throne and the sanctity of his kingdom, that he would exact a terrible and comprehensive price for this insubordination. He did not just want to rule the world, he sought to become its singular, undisputed God. This is the central political doctrine, the terrifying thesis upon which our entire story is built. The war to come would not be for territory, for trade routes, or for tribute alone. It was to be a holy war, a global crusade to establish a new world order founded on a single, mandatory religion: the cult of Nebuchadnezzar. This was a doctrine of spiritual genocide. Every nation that fell before his armies would be systematically stripped of its history, its culture, its traditions, and its gods. They would surrender not only their soldiers and their gold, but their very identity, their very soul, all to be replaced by a monolithic, state-enforced devotion to the Assyrian throne. It was the ultimate, terrifying expression of totalitarian power, an attempt to conquer the very consciousness of humanity. The man handpicked to execute this chilling vision was Holofernes, the commander-in-chief of the Assyrian army, second in authority only to the king himself. We must understand Holofernes not just as a general, but as the chief emissary, the high priest and chief evangelist of this new, violent imperial cult. His orders were precise, public, and apocalyptic. With a colossal force of 120,000 infantry and 12,000 cavalry force, so vast it seemed the very earth groaned under its weight, was to march west and leave a trail of broken altars and shattered gods in his wake. Nebuchadnezzar's decree was absolute and clear: you shall go out. and you shall destroy all their gods, so that all nations might worship Nebuchadnezzar alone. Holofernes executed this command with a brutal and chillingly effective strategic brilliance. His campaign was a masterwork of psychological terror. As he swept through the coastal plains and into the heart of the West, he wasn't just winning battles, he was systematically deconstructing entire societies from their spiritual and cultural foundations. He burned sacred groves, which were the centers of communal life and religious practice. He smashed idols, not just as acts of vandalism, but as public demonstrations of their impotence. He demolished temples, erasing the physical embodiment of a people's faith. Each act was a carefully calculated and widely publicized piece of political theater, a message broadcast across the ancient world. Your gods are powerless, your beliefs are worthless, your history is meaningless, your identity is erased. There is only one power, one name to be revered, and that is Nebuchadnezzar. The political fallout was swift and catastrophic. A contagion of terror washed over the Western nations. Mighty kingdoms that had stood for centuries, with proud warrior traditions, collapsed without a fight. Their kings and princes, terrified by the reports of Holofernes' ruthless efficiency, sent delegations not to negotiate terms, but to beg for their lives. They offered their people as slaves, their lands as provinces, their entire national wealth as tribute. Holofernes accepted their surrender, but his non-negotiable price was always the same: their faith. The entire region became a desolate landscape of forced conversion, a testament to the horrifying success of his political and psychological warfare. But then, the Assyrian war machine, seemingly invincible, reached a formidable obstacle. It was not a great walled city or a rival empire, but the rugged, unforgiving hill country of Judea, guarding the narrow, vital mountain pass that served as the gateway to the entire nation, and by extension to the holy city of Jerusalem and its sacred temple, was the small, fortified town of Bethulia. For the Israelites, who had only recently returned from the trauma of the Babylonian exile and painstakingly rebuilt their temple and their nation, the stakes could not have been higher. This was not a battle for a border, it was a battle for their continued existence as a people. To lose Bethulia was to lose everything. They fortified their towns, stockpiled what meager supplies they had, and, in a collective act of national defiance, chose to resist. When news of this improbable defiance reached Holofernes, his reaction was one of pure, venomous, and indignant rage. Who were these people? This tiny, insignificant nation of former slaves, this footnote in the grand history of empires, daring to stand against the divine manifest will of Nebuchadnezzar. It was at this critical juncture, as his rage peaked, that a pivotal moment of political intelligence unfolded, an opportunity that could have changed everything. The leader of the Ammonite forces who were allied with Assyria, a man named Achior, stepped forward. Unlike the Assyrians, who saw the Israelites as nothing more than stubborn hill folk, Achior understood them. He knew their history, their God, and their unique, precarious geopolitical position. He proceeded to give Holofernes a flawless, comprehensive intelligence briefing. He explained, with the clarity of an expert, that Israel's power was not derived from conventional military might, but from its unique covenant relationship with its God. "My lord," he began, laying out the cycle of their history, "as long as they have not sinned against their God, they prosper. But whenever they have departed from the way he appointed for them, they have been destroyed in many battles and led away as captives to a foreign land." Achior's advice was strategically sound, a piece of actionable intelligence. Investigate the current spiritual and moral state of Israel. If they have offended their God, you will conquer them with ease. But, he warned, his voice heavy with the weight of historical precedent, if there is no transgression in this people, then let my Lord pass them by. For their Lord and their God will defend them, and we shall become the laughingstock of the whole world. This was not a theological sermon. It was a high-value political and military analysis. It was the key to victory, a roadmap to either an easy conquest or a humiliating defeat. Yet, for Holofernes, a man so thoroughly indoctrinated in the ideology of his king's absolute supremacy. This information was impossible to process. The very concept that an unseen tribal deity could stand as a genuine obstacle to the manifest power of Nebuchadnezzar was an intolerable heresy. His ego, the very engine of his campaign, made him incapable of rational threat assessment. His worldview had no room for a power higher than his king. In a fit of furious rage, he condemned Achior for this perceived treachery. He had him bound and cast out at the foot of the mountain pass, essentially leaving him for dead where the Israelites would later find him and take him in. In that moment of blind fury, Holofernes wasn't just rejecting advice. He was rejecting reality itself. His ideology had made him stupid. This single act of hubris, this willful intelligence failure, sealed his fate. He laid siege to Bethulia. He did so not with a rash, costly frontal assault, but with a calculated, insidious cruelty designed to break their will. He identified and seized control of the town's water supply. It was a siege of thirst, an attack on the most basic element of life, a tactic intended to turn the citizens against their own leaders. For 34 agonizing days, the people of Bethulia endured. The cisterns ran dry. Infants wailed incessantly, their mothers' breasts barren. Strong men, once the defenders of the city, collapsed in the sun-baked streets. As their bodies withered, so did their collective resolve. The very fabric of their society, woven from faith and shared purpose, began to tear. The people, once united in their defiance, now formed a desperate, angry mob. They swarmed the house of Uzziah, the chief magistrate of the city, not with prayers for deliverance, but with furious demands for immediate surrender. Here, we witness a second catastrophic political failure, this time emanating from within Bethulia's own leadership. Uzziah, facing a full-blown insurrection and the complete collapse of public morale, made a desperate and flawed political calculation. He attempted to appease the mob by making a bargain, not with the enemy besieging his walls, but with God himself. "Have courage for 5 more days," he pleaded with the volatile crowd. "If at the end of 5 days the Lord our God has not helped us, I will do what you say." It was a disastrous move. He placed the sovereign, timeless God of the universe on a probation period. He turned faith into a political ultimatum, a public deadline. In doing so, he effectively signaled to his people that he, their leader, believed God's power was conditional and time-sensitive. He had started the official countdown to surrender. All hope, all faith, all resolve evaporated from Bethulia, replaced by a 5-day, citywide death watch. It is at this absolute nadir of political will, at this moment of total spiritual despair, that Judith of Bethulia finally takes the stage. And her entrance is an immediate, decisive, and masterful seizure of power. A wealthy and highly respected widow, renowned for her profound piety, her unwavering observance of the law, and her startling beauty, she had been observing this civic collapse from her home. When she heard of Uzziah's 5-day ultimatum, she recognized it instantly for what it was: a theological abomination and a political capitulation. She summoned Uzziah and the elders of the city to her home. And in her home, she did not plead, she did not suggest, she took command. Her speech to these men is a masterwork of political rhetoric, a stunning display of intellectual and moral dominance. She immediately goes on the offensive, seizing the initiative. "Who are you to put God to the test this day?" she demands, instantly flipping the power dynamic. With surgical precision, she dismantles their foolish, faithless bargain, exposing the fundamental theological error of treating the God of creation like a man who can be cornered or threatened. She then pivots brilliantly, launching into a powerful appeal to their shared history, their national identity. She reminds them of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs of their faith, who were tested not for 5 days, but for their entire lives. She reframes their present suffering, transforming it from a sign of God's abandonment into a crucible intended to purify, not to punish. In a single, breathtaking oration, She exposes the cowardice of their leadership, corrects their flawed theology, and reawakens their dormant sense of divine purpose. Then, she unveils her own initiative, masterfully shrouding it in an aura of divine authority and mystery. "I am about to do a thing," she announces with cold certainty, "that will be remembered throughout all generations." But she astutely refuses to give them any details. "You must not ask what I intend to do," she commands, her voice leaving no room for argument, "for I will not tell you until it is finished." This was a stroke of strategic genius. By withholding her plan, she forced them to place their trust not in their own failed strategies, not in a foolish 5-day timeline, but in her and the God she so clearly served. She elevated herself above their petty political squabbling, positioning herself as a direct and chosen instrument of a divine plan. The humbled, shamed elders, outmaneuvered and overpowered by her conviction, had no choice but to assent. In that moment, Judith ceased to be a mere citizen. She became the de facto political and spiritual leader of Bethulia. Her preparations for this mission were a series of deeply symbolic and highly strategic acts. She shed her widow's sackcloth, the public symbol of her grief and seclusion, and bathed, purifying herself for the task ahead. She then adorned herself in her most magnificent clothing, her finest perfumes, and her most valuable jewels. This was not an act of vanity, this was her battle armor. She understood the psychology of her target. She knew that in the world of powerful, arrogant men like Holofernes, beauty was a form of currency, a distraction, and a weapon. She was dressing for a specific role in a deadly play, preparing to enter the lion's den. Critically, she packed a bag with her own kosher food and wine. This seemingly small detail is immensely significant. It demonstrated her unshakable resolve to maintain her own spiritual and cultural purity, a silent act of defiance, even as she prepared to immerse herself in the heart of corruption. She and her loyal maid then walked out of the city gates and straight toward the enemy camp. When captured by an Assyrian patrol, her performance began. She immediately presented herself as a valuable asset, a defector with crucial intelligence. She played on the soldiers' egos, praising their commander's reputation and the might of their army. When she was finally brought before Holofernes, she fell prostrate, an act of calculated submission that instantly disarmed him and fed his colossal ego. He was stunned by her beauty, but it was her words that began to weave the intricate web that would ultimately ensnare him. Her speech to Holofernes is a breathtaking piece of political theater, a dissertation in the art of deception, where every single word is a carefully placed, baited trap. She brilliantly confirms his own biased view of the world. She tells him she has fled her people because they are on the verge of committing a great sin against their God-consuming food reserved for the temple due to the famine of the siege. This sacrilege, she explains with the conviction of a true believer, will surely trigger their God to abandon them, leaving them defenseless and ripe for destruction. Notice the diabolical brilliance here. She is using the very intelligence that Achior had provided, that Israel's strength is tied to their righteousness, but she is twisting it to serve her own ends. Achior warned Holofernes that Israel's God protected them. Judith tells him they are about to forfeit that protection, and that he, Holofernes, is the divinely chosen instrument of their punishment. She then delivers the argument that completely seals his belief in her, the masterstroke of her psychological manipulation. "God has sent me," she declares, her eyes meeting his with what he could only interpret as pious sincerity, "to accomplish with you things that will astonish the whole world." It was the absolute, unvarnished truth. But Holofernes, a man drowning in his own messianic self-importance, could only interpret it one way. This beautiful prophetess, a servant of a rival god, had been sent by that very god to facilitate his victory. She had confirmed his divine mandate. She had validated his entire political theology. In his mind, the God of Israel was now surrendering to the God of Nineveh. She proposed a deal. She would stay in his camp, under his protection. Each night, she would go out to the nearby valley to pray. She would, she promised, use this direct spiritual connection to learn the exact moment the Israelites committed their final, unforgivable sin, the precise moment their divine protection was lifted. Then, she would personally lead him and his entire army into Bethulia and onto Jerusalem without a single Assyrian casualty. It was an offer he couldn't possibly refuse. It promised him everything he wanted, a swift, bloodless, and glorious victory that would prove once and for all the absolute supremacy of Nebuchadnezzar. And if you are finding this deep dive analysis into ancient strategy as thrilling as I do, please take a moment to show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing. It tells our team that you want more content that uncovers the hidden genius and complex intrigue within these timeless stories. For 3 days, Judith executed her plan with the flawless precision of a seasoned intelligence operative. She accepted Holofernes' hospitality but politely declined his food and wine. Sticking to her own provisions, a continuous, quiet act of cultural and religious resistance that went completely over his head. Her nightly excursions to the valley to pray served a dual critical purpose. First, it reinforced her public persona as a holy woman in direct communication with the divine, building her credibility within the camp. Second, and more importantly, it was a brilliant tactical maneuver. She was conditioning the camp's sentries. She was normalizing her movements, training them to see her and her maid leaving and re-entering the camp at night as a routine, non-threatening event. She was, in effect, creating and rehearsing her own exfiltration route in plain sight. By the 4th day, Holofernes' infatuation and impatience had reached their peak. He decided the time for his ultimate conquest had come. He organized an intimate, private banquet in his tent, inviting only his personal attendants and, of course, Judith. His goal was unambiguous: seduction. To possess this woman, this holy prophetess of the enemy, would be the ultimate symbol of his triumph, a physical consummation of his victory over her people and her God. She was to be his final, most beautiful living trophy. Judith arrived, playing her part to perfection. She reclined, she ate, she drank. The text says Holofernes' heart was ravished, and that he drank far more wine than he had on any other single day in his life, eventually dismissing all of his attendants so he could be alone with her. The stage was now perfectly set. The most powerful general in the world, the man who held the fate of nations in his hand, lay in a drunken, helpless stupor before the very woman he believed he was about to conquer. In the sudden, heavy silence of the opulent tent, Judith uttered a short, fierce prayer to her God, asking for strength to exalt Jerusalem. Note the language. This was a political act. She then moved to the bedpost and took down Holofernes' own massive sword, his personal scimitar. Grasping his hair to expose his neck, she struck with all her might. Twice, she had severed his head. She had not just killed a man, she had decapitated the entire Assyrian military campaign. In the rigid, top-down hierarchy of ancient armies, the general was the singular brain, the will, the animating force. Without him, the army was a headless, useless, and panicked beast. She then committed one last act of supreme symbolic dominance. She took the magnificent, ornate canopy from his own bed and wrapped the severed head within it. His glory would now be the shroud for his shame. Giving the head to her maid, who placed it in their food bag, the two women walked calmly out of the tent, through the Assyrian camp, past the conditioned guards who paid them no mind, and into the freedom of the night. Reaching the walls of Bethulia, Judith's voice rang out, no longer the seductive whisper of the general's tent, but the powerful, clear voice of a victorious commander. She displayed the gruesome trophy to the stunned people. "The Lord has struck him down by the hand of a woman," she proclaimed. The city erupted in shock and jubilation, but Judith, the consummate strategist, did not pause to celebrate. She immediately shifted from assassin to field general, issuing a series of brilliant tactical commands. She ordered the head to be hung from the city wall, a horrific psychological blow for the enemy to see at sunrise. She then instructed the Israelite men to arm themselves and rush out of the gates as if to launch a full-scale assault. Her strategy worked to absolute perfection. The Assyrian sentries, seeing the charging Israelites, rushed to awaken their commander. The discovery of his headless corpse in a tent soaked with his own blood sent a wave of absolute, paralyzing terror through the camp's leadership. The cry of betrayal echoed, and the most feared army in the world dissolved into a panicked, leaderless mob. Order vanished. Discipline shattered. They fled in every direction, hunted down by the Israelites who now poured out from Bethulia and the surrounding towns, winning a total and complete victory. The story of Judith, therefore, is far more than a simple tale of piety. It is a profound and deeply relevant political commentary. It demonstrates that true power is not always found in the size of an army or the wealth of a treasury, but in the intellectual clarity, spiritual fortitude, and strategic courage of its leaders. Judith succeeded because she understood her enemy's political theology better than he did. She saw that his entire worldview, his entire campaign, his entire identity was built on a fragile foundation of ego, and she targeted that foundation until the whole magnificent, terrifying structure collapsed. She reminds us that leadership can, and often must, emerge from outside the established systems, especially when those systems have proven themselves to be weak, cowardly, or corrupt. She proved that faith is not a retreat from the world, but a powerful lens through which to analyze it and a powerful motivation to act decisively within it. In a world still grappling with the clash of ideologies, with the intoxicating arrogance of power, and with the immense courage required to resist it, the political masterclass of Judith of Bethulia is not just relevant, it is essential. Her story is a timeless blueprint for how intelligence, courage, and faith can combine to become an unstoppable force for liberation.